Dismissing international criticism over the arrest of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, the Kremlin has accused the United States of America of interfering in China's domestic affairs. After US criticized the Russian crackdown on protesters and called for the release of those who had been arrested by Russia. Spokesman for Vladimir Putin has said that Russian president is open to dialogue with Joe Biden, while also accusing Washington of meddling in the mass protests in Russia. Kremlin spokesman said that Putin would respond in kind, but for that, new US administration must show willingness to talk. Joining us on this broadcast is WION correspondent Stuart Smith, who's joining us from Moscow. Stuart, we've seen Russia now accuse US of meddling in Russia's internal affairs, but the world saw the visuals from Moscow, isn't it? Close to 40,000 people were on the streets in Moscow. The protests turned violent. The riot police used force in an attempt to quell the protesters, and US raised objection, as did the European Union, and EU Council Chief Charles Michel has called for the release of Alexei Navalny. So Russia is facing criticism not only from the US but from the EU as well.
Yes, the Russian government is claiming that the United States helped create this huge turnout by inciting and encouraging people to protest. They were saying that the US Embassy here in Moscow published a route map and mentioned that people would be walking towards the Kremlin, which is more information than even the organisers put out prior to the protest. The US Ministry of Foreign Affairs is calling in the US ambassador, or called in the US ambassador on Sunday to explain these posts on the US Embassy website. The US ambassador to Russia says that this is quite normal. When there's a demonstration where US citizens may be affected, they publish a warning about the route to keep everybody safe. But Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs is saying that helped to incite the protest by publishing information on what was about to happen. As well as that, the United States Embassy here in Moscow published a tweet saying that it supports the right of all people to peaceful protest and freedom of expression. Steps being taken by Russian authorities are suppressing those rights, and Russia is calling that interference in its own domestic affairs and says the US should focus on its own problems at home. Having said all of that, there are still routes open for dialogue. This is one example of an area where the US and Russia is disagreeing. There are many others, but there are still trends going on in other realms, such as the renewal of the nuclear treaty between the two nations, and also talks about, for example, President Putin joining Davos summit in a few weeks' time. And also Russia still saying it's open to dialogue with Joe Biden on areas of mutual interest.
Right, Stuart, we saw the visuals that came out of Moscow and St. Petersburg and other cities out of Russia. It shocked the world. These were some of the largest protests in Russia in years, as much as in favor of in favor of Alexei Navalny, as much against policies of Vladimir Putin. But Russia is calling this its internal affairs. What's the situation on the ground today? Because Alexei Navalny supporters have again planned protests next weekend, isn't it?
They certainly have. So as things stand today, it's quiet on the streets, no protests going on, at least no mass protests. And so things, I think people are looking towards the weekend for their next opportunity to protest. The Kremlin won't be allowing any further protests for the same reasons that they didn't allow this weekend's or last weekend's protest. There's still the coronavirus legislation in place which bans mass gatherings like this, and there's still the law about receiving prior approval for any mass protest, which the organisers say they won't be trying to seek. So who knows what will happen this weekend?
Right, Stuart, one final question very quickly. What does Kremlin believe as far as ties with the US are concerned under Joe Biden administration?
Russia will be looking for dialogue. As things stand, relations are already very cool. Russia and the US are not speaking to each other except through embassies. So the starting point for Russia and the US will be even talking to each other. From then on, there'll be a few things they'll be looking at. There's the New START weapons treaty, which was renewed, this nuclear treaty. But also Russia and the US recently left another treaty called the Open Skies Treaty, which allows each country to take surveillance flights over the other country. So a big problem there for any mutual cooperation. They'll also be looking at human rights records. Alexei Navalny's detention is a sore point amongst both governments, and the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which takes gas from Russia to Europe, has been criticised by the US and is another flashpoint in US-Russia relations.
Stuart Smith, thank you so much for joining us from Moscow and getting us all the latest on this big political story. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.